Seema is here, so she can start the proceeding.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes,
Hi, good evening, everyone. Today's topic is a very interesting and one second. Good evening, everyone. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for joining today. Today is a very interesting topic, very different topic, and the speakers are different, and is one of the my most favorite topics in the whole webinar series. I would like to introduce our young and dynamic and budding leader of API, and that's Dr. Sujit Poonam. Sujit Poonam is an interventional and structural cardiologist practicing in Stockton, California. He's also our incoming regional director for Pacific region. Over to you, Sujit.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, actually. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to set up this webinar today. To help me out with the moderation, I have two excellent physicians with me. Dr. Brahma Sharma. Dr. Sharma, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
He's a graduate of SMS Rajasthan University. And since 2006, he's been a faculty at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. As a cardiologist, he's a director of Outreach Teleclinic and cardiogenic shock team there. He's past chair of API Foundation and Tri-State Chapter, and currently chair of Ad Hoc Cardiovascular Committee. And also we have Dr. Anil Tibrewal, graduate. Dr. Tibrewal, are you there? Yeah,
He is here, but muted.
Okay, so he's a graduate of CMC Vellore, and he knows one of our speaker, Dr. JP, very well. And he did his general surgery at Maulana Azad Medical College, and also did his residency at Cleveland Clinic Health System, and he's been working as general surgeon with special interest in advanced laparoscopic and robotic surgery in Dallas, Texas. So with that, before we head out to our speakers for tonight, I would like to share a few slides of myself, just to bring up the up to the par for the audience, what questions you can ask and things like that. Let's see. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So to start off with, today's topic is, COVID-19 pandemic. How do we deal with this, epidemiological nuances of it? So epidemiology is defined. We all know the definition about it, but some people like to call it science of possibilities. You consider all the possibilities for a possible pathogen and start working towards attacking it. So the father of modern epidemiology is considered to be John Snow. In 19th century, he plotted death cases of cholera on a map of London, and eventually traced the outbreak to a single contaminated well and a water pump. So that's and then cut to the COVID-19. We all know that it started in Wuhan, migrated to the entire world in no time, because of what we live in, the global village concept, because of a lot of travel. And we all have a lot of questions about, the whole situation. How many people are still infected and we don't know? How long will it last? How long of a lockdown or a shelter at home is the best? How much of economy damage it will cause apart from the number of deaths? How much of a complacency we were in about facing a pandemic? How would a nurse in a situation like US, how would a nurse be able to work if school-age kids, are at home and the schools are closed? How would a homeowner pay mortgage if the employer shuts down his business and not able to pay the salary? So briefly about strategic national stockpile. After the Cold War ended in the US, the national disaster planning was disbanded. But later on, the first enabling statute came from Public Health Security and Bioterrorism Preparedness Act of 2002, which directs the Secretary of Health and Human Services to maintain a strategic national stockpile. And you can see the budget allocated for that starting in 2001, around 500 million to 600 million each year. And how much does the national stockpile have in terms of surgical masks and N95 respirators? 30 million surgical masks and 12 million N95 respirators. So if you take that in New York State alone, when the pandemic hit New York State, it was consuming 3.5 million of these masks every week at the start of the pandemic. So you can imagine how long this national stockpile will last. So that was our preparedness to begin with. So a lot of people like to call this as a third world war because there are a lot of similarities. If you look at it, just in the US, more than 25 million has filed for unemployment. More than 60% of retail stores closed in April, and it's supposed to shrink. The GDP is supposed to shrink by 40% in the second quarter. And to give an analogy, during World War II, Ford Motors and General Motors manufactured tanks and airplanes. And now coming to COVID, they're manufacturing face masks and ventilators. So these turned out to be our arsenal in facing it. And for the future, some people are thinking with foresightedness. Scientists already mapped 55 viruses genome and species of bats, because zoonotic diseases are, one of the pandemics that we have is a zoonotic disease. So it's a prelude to mapping 320,000 viruses jumping from animals to humans, thereby would help combating future pandemics. So a little bit about herd immunity before the speakers take over. It was coined a century ago and made popular by the increasing use of vaccines. An important milestone was in the 70s when a simple threshold theorem was proposed. What it is if immunity, that is with successful vaccination, were delivered at random, and if members of population mixed at random such that an average each individual contacted or not individuals in a manner sufficient to transmit the infection, then the incidence of the infection would decline if the proportion of the immune exceeded. So if we hear the R0 number, the formula is R0 minus 1 divided by R0. And what is an R0? R0 is basic reproduction number, the number of secondary cases generated by a typical infectious individual when the rest of the population is susceptible at the start of a novel outbreak. And the critical vaccination level means the proportion of the population that must be vaccinated to achieve the herd immunity. So this picture depicts what happens with an R0 of 4. In the third transmission cycle, one person leads to 16 people. Whereas if you have a 4 of R0 here, 4 minus 1 is 3 divided by 4. 3/4 of the population, if they are immune by infection or vaccination, you see this here, the disease stops spreading and the herd immunity threshold is considered to be achieved. So this is the typical threshold concept of herd immunity. And with the R0 of around 3, you need 67% people achieving infection or some immunity sought. So, and the last slide is the R0 for typical diseases that we heard about before. Measles has about 16, so we need to have more than 90% infected or vaccinated in order to get community control. And you can see the COVID-19 is around 2.5. So with that background, I will start introducing our first speaker, Dr. Brahma Mukherjee. She is John D. Kalbfleisch Collegiate Professor of Biostatistics, Chair of Biostatistics, Professor of Epidemiology, and Professor of Global Public Health in the School of Public Health in the University of Michigan. She's a research scholar for Michigan Institute of Data Science and Associate Director for Quantitative Data Sciences. there in University of Michigan Cancer Center. She has been in the forefront of coming up with models. She has had a multidisciplinary team that she's been working with in the last few months. They came up with projections for how much social distancing can benefit, how much of shelter at home can benefit. So without much further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Mukherjee to talk to us.
Thank
Dr.
you
Mukherjee.
so much, Sujit. Can you all hear me okay? Sujit, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, all right, thanks. So thank you everyone for joining, and it's a pleasure to be able to talk with you. Good morning to those of you in India. It's very early. As it was mentioned that we started this work on modeling and predicting COVID-19 outbreak in India very early during the course of the pandemic. So I still remember the date. It was March 16th, and that's when Michigan started its stay-at-home order. And all of us, and many people from Indian origin, students, postdocs, scholars who are quarantine data scientists, we are very anxious about our families back home, as well as what can we do? What can we contribute as data scientists? So that led us to the establishment of this interdisciplinary group of scholars with members from Johns Hopkins University, University of Connecticut, Delhi School of Economics, and majority of people from University of Michigan School of Public Health. And we called this the COVID-19 study group. At the time, India had 536 COVID-19 cases and 10 deaths. So we were wondering that what the projection and the future looks like. So, but before I begin this talk, and particularly for this audience, I'd like to take a moment to really thank the frontline health workers who have been taking care of COVID-19 patients all around the world, from Detroit, Michigan, to Dharavi, Mumbai. Our gratitude, our deepest gratitude to all of you and your colleagues. So I want to summarize some of our work. So the first paper that we wrote, and it was we chose an academics, you're always writing papers in journals and peer-reviewed journals. I had never written an article in Medium, which is not peer-reviewed. But given that we started the work in March 16th and the things were exponentially growing, exponential growing processes probably call for exponential actions as well. So, so we published the first article on Medium, and it was projections for the next couple of months and what could happen. And actually it was about May 15th. And we sequentially analyzed the lockdowns over time during the lockdown and as each extension and phase of the lockdown was extended. So basically, I feel like we had this journey with the pandemic with models and data. So I'd really like to point out this app because I can only show you projections. I don't update my slides every day, but this app actually updates all the observed data and the projections every day, because the ground reality is really changing every day, and we need to really be mindful of that as we do the projections. So our first paper just got accepted in the Harvard Data Science Review special edition on COVID-19. There are some exceptional papers here, which actually proposes novel data science methods as well. So the way I'll structure this talk is to share a little bit with you about the pre-lockdown forecasting that we did, and then how we continued the post-lockdown analysis. And Sujit gave a wonderful overview of how exponentially growing pandemic can really create a havoc in short amount of time. And it has been almost a collective failure of our societal imagination, how things have really grown in the last 2 months and how our lives have changed. And then finally, a lockdown is not just epidemiology, it's not just numerical forecasting, the massive cost it has to human lives, and particularly lives in India. So this is where we stood when we published the first Medium article, March 19th, as I mentioned, that things did not look so dire at that time, but we had experienced what had happened in US and Italy and China, how with few cases, you can really cannot foresee what is going to happen within a month. So particularly for Indian population, though India has a youthful population, there are existing comorbidities. There is a large number of uninsured. The number of hospital beds are less than 1 per 1,000 people. Compare it to US, where there is about 3. Number of ICU beds, less than 60,000 ICU beds. 1 out of 2 ICU beds with ventilator. So if the hospital system was overwhelmed, then the death toll will rise. So that's why early projections were very much needed. So this was our first paper which drew substantial media attention, and we did not really expect it because we just wanted to contribute to the process and coming up with some transparent data science where models and graphs and figures are out there and other people could test our work and change the parameters for forecasting. So at the time, what we had predicted is about 60,000 cases by May 15th and an upper bound or a credible interval of about 900,000. And if it is something that I'd like to point out, these projections that people are making are extremely uncertain, and they have an uncertainty and a quantification associated with it, which is often ignored by the press and the media, and often in many projections as well. So forecasting have been criticized, and rightfully so, but I'd like to show you some of the nuances of what we project. So as I said, that when we published this Medium article and generated a 30-page report, we really did not have any idea that the media is going to pick this up. And this was actually noted by several government officials and health professionals, and it was covered very widely across the world. And it was amazing that, it generated about 180 media clips reaching 1 billion views across the world. I have written many papers, but none of them, and all of them peer-reviewed, have never had this much impact or reach. So this was very surprising and sobering for all of us. And then March 21, we published this paper, and then March 24th came the lockdown, and which has been going on in several phases, as you all know. A lockdown has severe consequences to people's lives. We saw the migrant workers and the suffering of human loss of lives, and that is not captured in these epidemiologic models that we are going to talk about. And the lockdown also has seen some social consolidation, galvanization of the society through lighting of lamps. And so it also has lots of implication on a societal front as how India is confronting this in terms of all psychosocial aspects of it, economic aspects of it, as well as the lives. The distribution of loss is probably not even across social strata. So lockdown as an epidemiologic strategy, what does it do? It really does not get rid of the virus. We all know that, and Sujit mentioned this. This buys us some time. This buys us time to ramp up our testing, to prepare our healthcare infrastructure, to optimally deploy resources. And you have to stop the virus or contain the disease to some extent to revive the economy, because even if things remain open, if the virus is in the community, probably people are not going to travel, not going to restaurants. And so we need to have some kind of mitigation in place. And during the time of lockdown, it's really important to take care of the people who are most vulnerable and keep the essential supply chain going. And with this pandemic, as we are seeing that it's not a discrete thing that this is going to disappear. So we need a long-term strategy, and lockdown cannot be a perpetual strategy. It is time to really think about the long-term strategy instead of discrete short-term tactics. So as Parikshit actually had given this analogy to me, that when we were making these projections, and all these projection models were talking about this tidal wave, different models were telling you, when is the wave coming? What is the time the wave is coming? What is the height of the wave? But regardless of what the predictions were, the message was clear that a tidal wave was coming, and we only had a picket fence to prepare for it. And we bought the time to really build our defense mechanism, our watchtowers, our dams, our escape boats. So the questions that were posed to us from policymakers, that what would be the efficacy of a lockdown? Can we expect to see a decline in fatalities, and if so, when? Can we see a decline in cases? If so, when? What does a successful lockdown look like? What are some of the public health metrics? And how should we resume normalcy from lockdown? Should we get back to our original mode, or some measure of suppression should be there? So this is a fascinating time for data scientists because natural experiments are going on all across the world. So let us look at some of the countries which have had lockdowns and how cases have declined, and when have you seen? In most of the countries, and this is why India stands out, you have seen a steady decline within 2 to 3 weeks. So China introduced lockdown, and we saw an effect within 3 weeks. This is South Korea. They did not introduce a lockdown, but they did exceptional amount of testing. And you see the testing, contact tracing, that brilliant job that with mobile health data that they did brought it down in 2 weeks. And this is Italy. Italy waited, and so to introduce the lockdown, a lockdown is most effective when you have fewer number of cases, because at any time, at point of time, if you do the lockdown, there will be harm to the economy. So better to do it early than late. Italy waited, and that's why the fatality rate is higher in Italy. But still, within about a month, we have seen cases coming down. But this is India. So we have not seen cases coming down. We have not seen turning the corner that you see in other countries after the lockdown have been imposed. So how does a modeler deal with it? And there have been many, many models, and I'm just linking a few of them. Models have been exponentially growing as well, like the virus. And what do many of these models do? And so this is a graph, as I said, that this is an older version of the model. Our models get updated in the app every day. What modelers do is to really think about conjectural forecasting scenarios, that what happens after the lockdown. If we come back, we choose parameters to reflect if we actually come back with some form of suppression, which we call cautious return. And then if we have moderate return, and we postulate parameter values in the model, which will reflect. So that's where the conjecture comes in, because we do not really know what is going to happen. And that's why you have to keep things updated every day almost, if not every week, if possible. So in our papers, we did predictions under the different scenarios of coming back. And we also did quantification of lockdown, the duration of lockdown. So is a 21-day lockdown better than a 56-day lockdown? The answer seems to be obvious that, of course, if we extend the lockdown, then the number of cases are probably likely to go down. But whether that's feasible for a country or for an economy or for a society, that's a different story altogether. But we definitely saw that the cluster of curves with 21 and 28, that was separated by anything more than a 7 to 8 week lockdown. So as I said, every day the ground reality is actually changing. And regardless of our papers, I do think our most important contribution from the group has been this updated projections. As data scientists, that's what we can contribute. So I'd like to just conclude about, this is sort of a narrative and a story. Where does India stand now? So we have not seen the cases flattening the curve. So has anything happened? Has lockdown been effective in any metric that you can think about? And we talked about the R metric. So India has 125,000 cases, about 3,700 fatalities right now. And the growth of the epidemic has been slow, but it has been still growing. And so this is in terms of case counts and death counts, but I'd like to really show you that the R curve, right? So even though the case counts or death counts are rising, this is an R curve, the basic reproduction number, but as calculated as a time varying function. So before the lockdown, the R was about 3.4. And it has gradually come down, and we can talk about what is the reason for this peak. And then it has gradually, consistently come down. Last 7-day average of R nationally has been about 1.3, 1.4. But there's tremendous heterogeneity in terms of any of these metrics, in terms of states and districts within states. So we really need to look at the data at a much more granular and community level. And we'll hear from our esteemed panelists about that as well. And this is the doubling time, which has been quoted by the government many times, that the government doubling time is increasing. So the time it takes to the cases to double, that's increasing. And right now it's about 13 days, which are positive metrics. The R and the doubling time are positive progresses that shows that the infection definitely has slowed down. I wanted to mention that there's tremendous variation among states, and we can really learn from different strategies different states have adopted. So from an R point of view, Punjab actually looks fantastic. Punjab is the only state for the last 7 days, they have an R below 1, and also a very large doubling time, more than 2 weeks. So what's going on in Punjab? If you look at the strategy for Punjab, so this is the number of active new cases, and this is the status of Punjab. And their strategy has been very data driven. So they have district level tracking and chasing of cases. And so there's a lot to learn from different strategies different states have adopted. And we also know the success of Kerala, which has followed a different model. So I feel the solutions for lockdown are going to be quite different across the country. So is India different? So when this slow growth, and we see the different form of the epidemic curve that I showed compared to other countries, what is it due to? Is it just limited testing, inaccuracy of data, reporting of deaths, cause-specific deaths? Probably there was an initial temperature hypothesis, but after looking at India and Brazil, probably that has been ruled out. There is a rule about, there is a hypothesis about BCG or the TB vaccination, use of antimalarials, inherent genetic susceptibility, and immunity, which we are going to hear about, and youthful population. But the testing has been in everybody's mind, that what is an optimal test strategy, and what is being reported on all these models are based on reported case counts, and are they meaningful? So I want to show you some data across the whole world in terms of tests. So US so far has done about 12 million tests, has tested 3.6% of its population, and the rate of test positivity is about 13%. Whereas India has done a remarkable job in increasing the number of daily tests, has tested about 2.3 million tests till May 19th, I think, and then has tested about 0.2% of the population. But the test positive rate in India has constantly been around 4%. So 4% is, so this is the constant test positivity rate for India, whereas you see in UK and US, you see this much higher test positivity rate and the growth pattern. And I have shown some other countries which have done tremendous in terms of testing, Iceland and South Korea, in terms of controlling the pandemic. So moving forward, what is going to happen in India? So I think that lockdown is not going to continue forever, it cannot. And in the next phase, we'll really need a lot of community participation and regional strategies. And we also need to manage risk in our daily lives. We live with risks, and we have to be cautious and protective. And this is true for US as well, as different states are opening up. We have to make good use of data. I think in different countries, there is different level of ethics and privacy consideration and different level of access of the population, but we can set up syndromic surveillance in terms of hospital admissions, estimating the average number of illnesses due to SARI and ILI, and also create temperature maps. We have to chase the epidemic. We cannot be complacent. We have to respect the virus and be on high alert. It's very trying time for policy making, because the whole world is getting used to this pause, push, and then drive mode of living, learning, and leading. And data can also be used. We did not talk about this, about projection of hospital admissions, how many beds would you need, PPE, and those are most relevant for the hotspots of the epidemic. So as I only talked about the epidemiologic piece, and I know that Parikshit is going to talk about some of the economic suffering, but I cannot undermine the human part of this pandemic, what it is doing to humanity. So as a public health scientist and as a citizen of the world, I think it is very important to lead at this time with science and humanity. what does social distancing mean? And what we have seen all across the world is that the structural inequities in the society does matter. When you are thinking about social distancing in a slum, and I share this with a very positive image because the women are still wearing masks and their temperatures are being tested. Even in a low resource setting, best measures of precaution are being taken, but it is not the same as social distancing in a Western world. For the last 10 days, I'd like to conclude with some data from US. This is from my own hospital, the state of Michigan, which you know that was hit very badly in terms of rate of fatalities. I work with a lot of physicians in Michigan medicine, and I have been spending the last 20 days just analyzing this data to show the rate of every possible outcome. And this has been really illustrated and articulated and showcased in the media between, so this is non-Hispanic comparison of non-Hispanic African Americans and non-Hispanic whites has not been even. It has not been evenly distributed. And as you adjust for socioeconomic status, as you adjust for education, even then there is a disparity. So we really need to work on the social tenets of the world. And finally, I'd like to conquer and actually conclude with some of the things that have happening to my state, West Bengal and Odisha, in terms of on top of the COVID-19 being hit by a category 4 cyclone. And then of course you cannot do social distancing. You have to save lives. Human lives is what you are trying to save. I feel like India is being truly tested in the whole world, but particularly the Darwinian theory of survival of the fittest is truly being tested. But are we going to give up? So I found this picture during the cyclone Amphan to be really inspiring, that a man still walks and still walks alone. And it was mentioned that we are facing a World War II-like situation. And I'd like to quote a poem by Austrian poet Rilke, that let everything happen to you, the beauty and the terror, just keep going because no feeling is final. So I do believe that we are going to learn to live with it and still succeed as humanity. So thank you for this opportunity for letting share a snippet of our work, and please stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Mukherjee. That was excellent. I know your family is still back in West Bengal, and we all pray that they'll be safe.
Thank you.
To go to the next speaker, I would like to invite Dr. Anil Tibrawal to introduce the speaker.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's my honor to introduce my esteemed teacher and professor, Jayaprakash Mulil. He is a professor of community medicine and consultant in division of gastrointestinal sciences. He was loved by all students, and he was a very favorite teacher of us. He was principal of Christian Medical College, Bangalore in 2002 to 2007, and currently is the chairman of Scientific Advisory Committee of National Institute of Epidemiology, Chennai. He's also an adjunct professor of Tufts University, Boston. Professor Mulil is an epidemiologist and a public health physician who has been involved in training of medical staff and faculty in public health and epidemiology for a very long time. Between 1998 and 2002, he was vice principal of CMC Bangalore, and then 2002 to 2007, he was principal. His CV is very long, and without going any further ado, I would request Dr. Professor Mulil to please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Yes.
From here, a good morning to you. I know it's all late in the evening for you, but I'm impressed by the amount of information that is floating around about this disease But there is, and we have all these models, and I'm an epidemiologist trained to do that. But I would like you to think in terms of a mental model all the information creates. And practically our behavior is based on this mental model that comes out. You all must have heard of the plague in medieval time. And it was known that time plague was brought by witches. And the people decided to do one thing to make sure the plague would end. They killed all the cats. Cats, of course, were accomplices of witches. I'm impressed that they figured out cat had something to do with the epidemic. I wish they had the strategy slightly different. Instead of killing, if they had starved them, maybe the epidemic would have stopped faster. My point to you is that there are several things we do. Amazingly, we want to control the infection. It has the absolutely opposite effect. So I want to start, and Dr. Mukherjee already clearly laid out all the fundamentals, but to approach and appeal to you about the mental model, I want to point out some of the basic principles which sometime in this particular epidemic has come out in a very confusing manner. Any epidemic we start, we hear of a new epidemic, we ask this 4 questions. Transmission dynamics. Basically, wow, is it a catchy disease? Number 2, we talk about pathogenicity. In other words, is it a lot of subclinical or people all are clinical? Has any significance in this situation? Number 3, does it kill a lot of people? And 4th important thing is it immunogenic? Now, if these questions come in with proper answers, we all can figure out how to deal with it. But from the beginning, we were getting confusing message. The fact about subclinical, it varied a whole lot. Now we know the majority are subclinical. The subclinical infect, now we know it does. Then came this whole issue of immunity. The message we got was, there is no immunity. People get better because of innate immunity. That is wrong. It confused the picture so much. It does produce good immunity. It gives you neutralizing antibodies. And it also, now we know, gives you T-cell based lasting immunity. I mentioned this at the beginning to ask this question. I am supposed to be probably one of the few in India who keeps reminding everybody, listen, in all your calculation, put the factor called herd immunity in your calculation. Now remember this whole thing, and Sujit came out with a very good explanation. There is an interaction between infected and susceptible, and out emerges a population called immune. And when the density of the immune increases, the virus finds it difficult to find the susceptible. And that simple notion is the basis of all this concept of herd immunity. And I experienced it during the H1N1 epidemic. In Vellore, when suddenly it stopped, we happened to measure what proportion among the Vellore population have been infected, 40%. And we could figure out that 1.7 was the norm. But the point is that it works. It works brilliantly. Now, there is a hesitation on many quarters of India. No, herd immunity doesn't exist. somebody said, very important person, I don't believe in herd immunity. I might as well say I don't believe in digestion. These are not any theory. They are the natural phenomena. But the point is, if you calculate that into the equation, you can at least face the epidemic more correctly, not in a panic mode. So what does it give us? If there is no immunity and there is no herd immunity, the message is everyone has to get infected before the epidemic ends. Until the vaccine comes, there is no solution. Vaccine is what we are looking forward to. And from what I said about the immunogenicity of the virus, the fact that a good vaccine will be available is almost certain, because the host agent is doing it in human host. So the vaccine must also do. That is good news. But the problem is, today in India, look at Mumbai, Chennai, most cities are right in the throes of this epidemic. How long will it last? So the problem is, people who get better after the disease, they are immune. And for the current knowledge, immune for a long time. That particular piece of information is important, because now we are suppressing, by and large, infection. But that time is gone for many parts of India. Kerala did a good job in suppressing. Brilliant, hats off to them. But not so in many major cities. Now, what should be your anxiety? Anxiety should be saving the sick, and the impression should be what to do in the hospital, how to make sure case fatality comes down. Now, I want to present one little angle, and the angle is, when you calculate death expected in India, you have to remember India is a younger population. Now there is good information available. Good in the sense these results are almost consistent from different authors. It talks about age-specific probability of dying given you have been exposed to COVID. And that information you can apply to India. But remember, you can't apply directly to the whole of India, because India is 67% rural and 33% urban. And anybody will tell you it is impossible the R0 to be same for rural and urban. Urban will have a high R0, rural much lower. So you apply the different R0, then the expected herd immunity level, which will put an end to this particular wave of epidemic, will be different. Now, I'm not talking about the current wave. We'll worry about the next wave subsequent. And then what happens? There will be deaths. Now, I'm going to keep the rural out, because in India, majority of the COVID deaths is going to be missed, because there is no way of confirming. We'll have to study excess mortality compared to last year. But let me give you a picture of mortality in India broadly. India has 10 million deaths every year, and 50% of them is in the 60 plus age group. 3 million are in the 15 to 59 age group, and 2 million in the under 14 and under age group. That is the broad distribution. 50% above 60 and above, and 15 to 59 is 3 million deaths, and below 14, 2 million. Now, COVID is going to make an impact in the first group, above 60, and there will be a huge mortality there. If you take urban area, from the expected deaths, there will be an additional death in this age group. And our calculations show in that age group, we expect 1.7 million deaths in the urban area. And from this particular thing, because the proportion dying only in urban area. And that will make a huge difference. But what about in the age group 15 to 50, this is 59, and that will be only about 70,000 deaths. Now, I'm giving these numbers for urban area because rural is difficult to conceptualize because the whole lot of parameters. Now, given this, look at the whole problem. In the under 15 age group, we don't expect anything. The focus has to be on the elderly. They will be contributing to the maximum. Two questions. Should we lock down everybody to save the elderly? I belong to the elderly age group, and I think not. And you stop the industry, stop the agriculture, and prevent what? Now, this is where we have to be very careful about this lockdown. The lockdown, in my mind, it destroyed lives of many people. Majority of Indians live on a daily wage basis. If they work every day, they get the salary. Unorganized sector provide the major source of income, and they manage. You cut their autonomy. What happened? We have, during the lockdown, closed many hospitals because the staff there got COVID. Don't people fall ill otherwise? For example, at CMC Vellore, for the first time, we are getting a cluster of ruptured appendix. We used to get appendicitis, but ruptured appendix in bulk. I just gave you an example of what happened when you take away the autonomy from patient. They can't reach the help they need. What happens to each district were isolated in one cluster and they could not cross the district. Every district doesn't have a good hospital or a cancer center. And for the last 2 months, if somebody felt a breast mark, you got to wait till lockdown is over. Now that option has to go away. And I think I was not going to talk about epidemiology because you have done. The human disaster that this is called cannot be tolerated. And the plea is, do not tell us that there is no immunity in this disease. There must be lab tests, observation tests, and the expected deaths in Indian context, a younger population, will be less than that we have experienced in urban areas in the western part. I stop this, and if there are questions, I will happily take it.
Thank you, Dr. JP. That was very good. So as we said earlier, we will come back to the question and answers after the speakers are done with the talks. So I request all the speakers to be available for that. And we have a lot of questions pouring in. To introduce our next speaker, I would like to call upon Dr. Brahma Sharma. Dr. Sharma.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So this is my distinct honor to introduce Dr. Parikshit Ghosh. He graduated from the premier institution of Presidency of Calcutta. Then he also came to United States from East Coast to West Coast. He went to Texas A&M, Boston University, and also University of British Columbia to do his economics and taught there. And Currently, he is at the prestigious Delhi School of Economics. His interest actually includes information economy, political economy, and the developmental economy. He has written a lot of articles and books about this current, very, very relevant issue about the impact of economy and the current crisis and the migration. Dr. Ghose.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I'm just trying to pull up my slides through screen share. I'll just make it full screen. Slideshow. Okay, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be able to present some thoughts. This coronavirus situation, it seems to me that it has in many ways made our world smaller, but also sort of made it bigger in a lot of ways, because a lot of the webinars that I'm participating in is happening across the globe, and this is one wonderful illustration of that. So I'm an economist, so I'm a little bit of an odd man out over here. So I'll focus on what my comparative advantage is. So I'll talk about the economic implications of both the virus, the pandemic, as well as the sort of measures that have been taken against it, like the lockdown. I have collaborated with Professor Bhramar Mukherjee's team in Michigan on some of the epidemiological studies. But for the purpose of this talk, I'm drawing on 2 articles which I've written, which are listed here, which specialize on the economic side of it. So one metaphor which I have used and other people have also used for this situation is that there's not one, but there's 2 crises. And the allusion is often brought up to this Greek mythology where, Odysseus, when he was returning after the war, he had to pass through this narrow passage. On one side was a monster, Scylla. On the other side was a whirlpool, Charybdis. And if he went too far in trying to avoid one of them, there was a danger of being sucked into the other. So many people have said that, we have to walk this tightrope right now between sort of letting the disease sort of explode versus letting our economies collapse. So how do we strike a balance? Now, that view is very oppositional. It's kind of zero sum, saving the economy versus saving health and lives. And what I would argue, if I have an overarching point in this little short talk, is that I'll try to push back against that view a little bit. Rather, I would say that we should sort of appreciate that there's a lot of synergy actually in trying to save the economy and trying to save the public health aspect. If we do a good job on one aspect, it'll actually help us in doing a better job on the other. What do I have in mind? For example, India took some early and strong measures which have been praised, like travel bans and so on. And the lockdown was brought in early after just about 500 cases, but not enough notice was given. And so then all of you are aware that it led to this sort of migrants in the cities sort of setting out on foot. And other than the human suffering, that also sort of increased the chance of, the spread of the disease, because social distancing and all was not maintained. And similarly, if the disease sort of really takes hold and it takes a lot of toll, then it changes consumer behavior, for example, it changes investor behavior, it impacts the economy. So there's a lot of synergy actually between the 2 aspects. Now, I'm also going to take a slightly different, so let me now come to the economic side of it. A lot of the talk often sort of centers around what is going to be the impact on GDP. And here I'll take a slightly different track. I'm going to say that, you know, at least for the short to medium term, we shouldn't worry that much about the impact on GDP. There are sort of alarmist estimates that there's going to be 30, 40% fall in GDP, which you can, you know, I've put some on the slide, the source being IMF. But I think the real problems that we face economically shouldn't be sort of encapsulated in GDP projections. They lie elsewhere. I mean, GDP is important. And if the stoppages and this kind of disruption goes on for many, many months, then of course we'll have to worry about aggregate production in GDP. The reason GDP contraction is not a very big problem for, let's say, a month or two is, for example, you know, unlike a war, our production capacity remains preserved, right? The factories are there, the people are there, they're not dying in a war. So that is one thing. The other thing is that things can be shifted over time. So a car company doesn't produce for a month, but you know, they can come back and work overtime and make up for some of that lost production. In fact, you know, we have in prosperous Western countries, you could say that a third of potential GDP is wasted because of weekends and holidays, right? So that's one aspect. Let me quickly cite a paper by Robert Barrow and others where they studied the effect of the First World War and the flu pandemic, which happened around the same time. According to their estimates, both had similar sized impacts on GDP, about, you know, between 6 to 8%, and a somewhat bigger effect on consumption. But after the end of, you know, going beyond 1918, the countries which were badly affected by the flu, they quickly came back, whereas countries which were badly affected by the war took a long time to sort of return to normal. And again, it's quite intuitive and understandable why, because war created a lot of destruction of productive capacity, which the flu didn't. So let me sort of come to sort of one of the main points which I want to emphasize, that there are two problems from an economic perspective. One is that, you know, because of all the disruptions, the pie for all of us, the size of the cake is going to shrink. And that's what we are worrying about. But there's another aspect to the economic problem, which is that the pie is going to be divided very unequally. The impact of income loss, livelihood loss is not going to be evenly distributed. So for example, speaking for myself, I have a salaried job as an economics professor at Indian University. I haven't been impacted at all. My salary is getting deposited in my bank account and I haven't lost a penny. Whereas many people I know, for example, the barber in the local market, whose shop has been shut for the last 2 months, and essentially he is not earning anything at all. So my larger point is going to be that, you know, we should really sort of focus on the second aspect more than the first aspect. I mean, the first aspect is there. If things go on like this for 6 months, then, you know, shrinking GDP will be a major problem. But right now, what is most pressing is to restore the huge inequality which this situation has triggered. Let me also say that we shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that, you know, of course, lockdowns have made people's livelihood problems much more severe. But even if we come out of the lockdown, there's still going to be a lot of problems faced by a lot of people. Once again, think about the barber in the shop, right? People are going to voluntarily stay away from contact, you know, the sort of exchanges which require contact. They're not going to eat out that much. They're maybe not going to go to movie theaters, even if there's no ban. And they're going to minimize their haircuts and so on, right? So people involved in those sorts of professions are going to suffer a lot of income and livelihood loss. And that's what we need to correct. So let's think in terms of the sort of long-term strategy on the epidemiological front and the economic front. Now, the epidemiology, I think there are people much better qualified than me to talk about it, and the previous two speakers have done so. But I think it's perhaps a fair summary to say that even from the epidemiological perspective, eventually we have to rely on surgical strikes, much more targeted interventions, testing, contact tracing, and so on, rather than the hammer blow of lockdowns. Lockdowns can only buy us time. At best, they can give us, they can be practiced for a short time. But let me come to the economic side of it, and let me sort of lay out what, in my mind, are the major challenges that have to be met. And there is an order to this bullet point list. I think it's in order of importance. The thing on the top is the highest, and then we go down that list. So these are the challenges. First of all, as I said, there's going to be huge shifts in the income distribution. There are big masses of people who are basically facing starvation. So that's the most important thing to tackle. Next comes this problem that, yes, if production gets hampered for two months or 1 month, that in itself is not a big problem. But what can happen is lots of firms may go bankrupt because of cash flow issues, because of solvency issues. So when we are in a position to start up again, we may find that many firms have basically collapsed, and that has to be prevented. The third problem is that because of all this situation and because people are not earning, again, when we are in a position to sort of fire back our economy, we may get into a kind of Keynesian recession, right? People are not spending because they don't have money, and that keeps businesses and economic activity limited because of a lack of demand. So that's a third potential problem we have to watch out for. Fourth, and this hasn't, in my opinion, hasn't been talked about a lot, that if the strategy to tackle the disease has to eventually rely on much more surgical strikes, which involves testing and isolation, then incentives have to be created for people to play along with that. And again, if you think of India, where people are under serious livelihood pressure, if somebody tests positive and is quarantined for 3 weeks, that means 3 weeks of income gone. And if this person is the sole breadwinner, then that is a serious situation for this family. So I will come to this later if I have time, but basically the idea is that, to have an intensive testing regime, what has to be brought in is generous livelihood support for people who are tested positive and who are isolated. Some countries in the world, actually I know of one example, which is Singapore. Singapore is actually paying what they call a quarantine allowance of 100 Singapore dollars, which is more than 5,000 rupees per day to anybody who tests positive and who has to go into quarantine. And Orissa, in the early days when people out of state were coming in, they were also paying 15,000 rupees for a 2-week quarantine. So I think those sorts of things are very, very essential, but somehow it doesn't seem to be popular, and we haven't adopted in a big way. To just sort of, I mean, I've said this already several times, but since this, I think, is in my opinion, is the biggest problem, let me sort of further emphasize it a little bit more. If you look at Amartya Sen's study of the Bengal famine in 1943, 3 million people died. There was a huge death toll. Now, overall food production in that year was not seriously short, but some of it was diverted by the British colonial government due to the war effort. But really what created this huge death toll is that people in certain professions, certain occupations, essentially saw their incomes absolutely crash. So this is a picture where you see, in the famine year, the prices of certain commodities, milk, fish, cloth, etc., relative to the price of rice, right? So people who are selling these commodities are, the main thing they were buying is rice. So relative to the sort of typical previous year, what was the drop in the prices of these goods? That's what this graph represents. And as you can see, for example, haircuts, the price of haircuts crashed by more than 80% in the famine year. So the barbers even if they had a few haircuts, they were getting almost no money for it. And also they were losing out in volume. So if you look at the sort of casualty, the composition of the people who died in the famine, the 3 million people, they were disproportionately represented by barbers, milkmen, fishermen, and so on and so forth. So it's this extreme change in the income distribution, which was really the big problem behind the Bengal famine and many other famines. So of course, famine in 1943 and the COVID situation now they're different in a lot of ways, of course, and we are a more prosperous society, but there are also underlying similarities. So there are lessons to be learned there. Also, as you can see, this graph shows, changes in stock prices of various companies in America. And you can see that the impact has been very, very uneven. So for example, Amazon has actually gained about 25% in stock price. So they're booming. Whereas Delta Airlines and the hotel chains, they have lost 50, 60% of their value. So basically the overall thing, one of the main economic challenge is how to spread out or how to share this pain more equally. Yeah, because the impact of the situation has been very, very different across various people. Let me skip ahead a little bit. It has been mentioned already that the Indian labor market is nothing like Western labor markets. The informal sector is huge, and most people earn a daily living. So if they can't work even for a day, that's a loss of income for them. So more than 80% of the people work in the informal sector, and even in the formal sector, people, about a third of the people don't have permanent jobs. So if production gets disrupted, they'll be thrown out. So very briefly, there was this economic package which the government came out with recently. So you must have read about it in the newspapers. So the headline number is pretty impressive. It's 10% of GDP or 20 lakh crores. But if you dig a little deep, most of the package which the government announced is loans and credit guarantees. They are not direct, what may be called fiscal expenditures, right? So if you various people have sort of estimated what is the fiscal component of this, and the consensus seems to be around 1% of GDP. Now, out of this 1%, there are cash and in-kind transfers. So there has been some effort to sort of shield the vulnerable people who have lost incomes. By far, I think the most valuable part of the government's package is the doubling of the food grains rations from 5 kg per head to 10 kg per head for the next 3 months. 10 kgs per head happens to be, from NSS data, what the average person eats in India, right? So if this is properly implemented, this means that at least calorie-wise, people's basic nutrition is taken care of. In addition to this, there has been some amount of cash transfers that the government has given out, but these are little dollops, right? There's 500 rupees in the JDY, the Jan Dhan Yojana accounts, and so on and so forth. They're really, if you look at the magnitude, they're really small. And overall, the cash transfer part is about 0.25% of GDP, if you add it all up. So I'll mention a praise and a critique here. The doubling of the food grains rations was very necessary, and that is a very valuable part of the package. The very small amounts of cash transfers is where the deficiency is. And I really hope that this is where more measures and more spending will be done. Now, let me just very quickly try to sort of spell out also the difficulties, right? So supporting poor people who have lost incomes is very hard in India. In a country like America, most people are in the tax network. So if you look at America's aid package, there's $1,200 per adult, $500 per child for families earning less than $75,000, right? So it's very fine-tuned, and the government has information about practically every household about how much they earn. So you can sort of customize and target these assistances. In India, unfortunately, less than 10% of the population is in the income tax record. More than 90%, the government doesn't have any record of who they are and how much they earn. So that makes it difficult. However, I believe, and I'll very quickly try to spell it out, that using some of the welfare schemes, it is possible to give cash transfers to most poor households. And also, you can see the necessity of this, and you can see also in this, this issue coming up in the videos. I thought I'll show you one or two video clips. Poor people, the migrants who are walking on the street, they're being interviewed. And when they're asked about, what they're facing, one thing they're saying is that for 2 months, I cannot just eat rice, right? I need a little subsidy. Many of the urban migrants, one of the big problems they've faced is that they couldn't pay rents and they're kicked out by the landlords. So if you want to give sort of basic assistance, then there's no alternative to giving also some amount of cash. Now, the point I want to make is that here are some of the major welfare programs which the government has. And what the strategy with the government has taken is that putting little bits of money is in all of them, right? So that with the hope that it kind of will add up to something. I think what the government should have done, and we still have the opportunity, is to use the first one, which is the PDS, the public distribution system, and use the beneficiary list of the PDS to give all the PDS beneficiaries not only these extra food grains, but also a certain cash allowance, okay? Now, why do I say that? PDS covers 2/3 of the population, more or less, right? From the lower end of the income spectrum. So that's by far the widest coverage compared to any of the other things in this list. PDS list also avoids duplication of benefits. For example, if you put money in Jan Dhan Yojana accounts, which the government has been doing, some family may have 3 of these accounts, another family may have 1, and some may have none, right? There's no sort of one-to-one mapping between these bank accounts and the households. So some people are getting double helping and some people are getting nothing at all. So the food grains, the PDS system doesn't have that. So I made a calculation in one of my articles that if you take the 2/3 of the population who are in the PDS list, and if you want to give them enough money to make sure they're at least at the official poverty line, and you want to do it for the next 6 months, how much will that cost? And the cost comes to about 3% of GDP. Now, if you think about that, that is a 5% increase in the public debt. India's debt to GDP ratio is about 70%, right? And we are not an outlier. 70% is neither too low, it's not too high. If you look at an international kind of comparison, we are kind of middle range. And so from 70%, spending this amount of money will take us to 74, 75, 73, something like that. And that is, in my opinion, eminently worth doing, and that is fiscally feasible from a long-term perspective. It's not going to break our back. Now, one thing which people have said is, where will the money come from right now? Yeah. And there, I think there's I think the main thing should be borrowing from the public. And this is something, again, which has not been talked about a lot, but let me show you a graph. This is what is happening in Indian banks, right? Indian banks are getting deposits. If anything, people don't have ways to spend right now, and they're also cautious. So they're saving a lot, and all that money is piling up in the banks, and nobody wants to borrow from the banks in this uncertain situation. So this tells you how much the banks have been depositing with the Reserve Bank of India. The Reserve Bank of India pays them some interest called the reverse repo, right? In normal times, banks are taking their money and giving it to investors, to businesses, a lot of economic activities going on. But a huge amount of money is piling up in these banks. Right now, it's about 8 to 9 lakh crores. And the Reserve Bank, and by proxy, the Indian government is paying interest on that money and not using it. So when people say that we don't have fiscal space to do, this sort of income support, 3% of GDP, I don't see the point for that, because there is a separate macroeconomic need actually to mop up the savings which is piling on in the commercial banks. Other than that, I think there's some room for taxation, because as I said, some people haven't been touched. I would put myself up as a prime example. Other people have totally lost their incomes. standard principles of justice say that people who have been fortunate should be taxed, and it should be shared, and it should be used to subsidize people at the bottom who have lost all their income sources. A lot of Latin American countries are introducing what is called a solidarity tax. Taxes on the super rich, on high income earners. In India, some IRS officers floated such an idea, and they're facing disciplinary motions, and I think that's very unfortunate. I think that the prospect of a temporary tax, not a permanent tax hike, but for this special year, people at the high end of the income distribution, it should surely be debated why they shouldn't contribute a little bit extra. The last point which I had is, I kind of spoke about it. I'll stop after this slide. As I said, apart from protecting people, at the bottom end, what is very important is, as we come out of this hammer and go into a more surgical strike kind of regime, where testing and contract tracing is really what we are relying on, we have to really keep our eye on incentives, right? People who test positive, if they're taken out of circulation, they will suffer a lot of economic damage, so they will resist it, right? You need the cooperation and the participation of the population in a sort of testing regime, like what South Korea did or Singapore did. So this, I think, is, and the other thing over here, as far as generating incentives, like giving some quarantine allowance and investing in decent isolation ward facilities, right? Things which are where people can comfortably live, it's hygienic and so on. The advantage of doing that is that the infected part of the population is much smaller. So you can spend a lot of money on people who have to be isolated, right? On per capita terms, you can spend a lot of money on them, but still your total bill will remain relatively small. So for example, if the government spends 1 lakh rupees each on 10 lakh infected people, it's still 0.05% of GDP. That's nothing compared to what we are spending. So this aspect needs some attention. Okay, so that's all I have to say. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. That was excellent, actually. So some of the chat that we are getting from the chat box is, Dr. Kavini mentions that US has done better in terms of, giving some cash back to the needy, and even the small scale industry and the medium scale, they're getting a lot of, reforms there or funding there. So that was very unique, actually. So, so we have a lot of questions pending for all the panelists. So we'll kind of go take turns and ask those questions. So one of the questions that came up was probably for Dr. Mukherjee. Do we have any model within the United States, how it is faring depending on the individual policies of that particular state, in terms of shelter at home and lockdowns? So do we have some models to talk on, and which strategy is working better?
Yes, so I think that I answered these questions in chat, and so there are a couple of questions I did not actually answer because I think that it's about immunity and whether chances of reinfection. So I'd let Dr. JP answer that. For state-wise, our app does have, I think the main problem when we initially started the projections were actually the national data is really masking the state level variability. And even within states, there's a lot of variation. So I think one point that was made by Parikshit and everyone is this social perception and the mental perception. I think that, in Kerala, the historical social tenets are very different in terms of literacy, healthcare awareness. They had one policy. They did not test a lot, but they had very good contact tracing, very clean and incentivized isolation centers. And they really were proactive earlier on. And I think that's very important. If we are actually going to live with the pandemic and another peak is going to hit us, we really need to be very proactive and vigilant about that. Punjab's strategy was much more data driven. So it really depends on, you need one very long-term sustainable strategy, and we see all across the world. And I think there is as we are getting a break and the R is coming down, probably we really need to exchange information and come up with a targeted strategy, because what works in Dharavi is not going to work in Kerala. And so it's completely different characteristics and not one size fits all. And policymakers should really, really recognize that. And there would also need to be a lot of participation and engagement and buy-in from the public. So if I feel so stigmatized and my wage is going to go away, I'm not going to be allowed, why am I going to go to get tested? So I think it's going to be perilous and dangerous if the government hide data for some kind of projected image and the public hides symptoms. That's the worst thing that can happen.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And before I let Dr. Sharma and Dr. Tibrewal raise some questions, we have one named Kishan who wants to ask a question to the speakers. Vijaya Garu, can you unmute?
Yeah, I think he left, Dr.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, please, Dr. Sharma, can you take the next question, please?
Audible?
Yes. Yes.
So I'm not an economist, but I will come to that part later, but I have a friend on the chat room, Dr. Kamini Trivedi. She's raising very relevant questions. And I also in the same camp. I want to ask this question to Dr. Mukherjee, if she's around. Now, we know that people with the COVID, more than any other category, those who have pre-existing conditions, cardiometabolic disease, hypertension, diabetes, they have a highest mortality. Now, in your Michigan or Detroit area, had anybody looked into this, separately? And the follow-up question on that is that we do know that people who are taking ACE, ARBs, and statins, they do have a better outcome. So maybe we should zero in on this particular entity and highlight that ultimately it is the final common pathway. People are dying from heart disease as much as they're dying from other issues. Can Dr. Mukherjee can address this? Has she looked into this especially?
So I think this is a great time actually I think it's a great time to ask that question, because for the last 5 days, I feel I have not slept because I have been looking at this question, and it's very race dependent as well and ethnicity dependent. So I believe that there is a genetics interaction in all of this that we need to unravel. So the 4 disease categories which stand out to be top in terms of our mining of the phenome are heart disease, cardiometabolic diseases, kidney disease, and respiratory diseases. So, and within those classes of diseases, for example, end-stage renal disease is much more, has a stronger association with COVID mortality. So if you go through the steps of the process, so who gets hospitalized? So from tested positive, you have a susceptibility model, and then you have a prognostication model, who gets hospitalized, who gets to the ICU, and finally the deceased. These are very different sets of risk factors which are contrasting these different categories. And it's absolutely fascinating that what we are finding in terms of pre-existing use of medications that you actually pointed out. What we are looking at is actually a drug-wide association study. Somebody asked me this question. Data science and machine learning is playing an incredible role here to look at the entire electronic health record in terms of lab values, in terms of existing conditions, as well as in existing medication. In Michigan, we also have a huge cohort with completely genetic association studies done. So this is really something, if we have to deal with this, we really need to understand what determines prognostication, because only, as you know, that the case fatality rate if we can manage the healthcare and take care of the most vulnerable, we can manage our risks better, because a large fraction of the population are going to be free, going to be completely fine staying at home with mild symptoms. But it is that fraction, how to predict those, that's the key question, so that we can prophylactically manage those. So that will give us a lot of reassurance, as you know, as physicians. So.
Thank you. And if I can follow up the same issue to Dr. Ghosh, because ultimately, the COVID has exposed the fault lines. Because of this COVID epidemic, we are learning that the same people living in our inner cities who have low socioeconomic status, pre-existing, family issues, societal issues, income issues, they are the ones most vulnerable, and they are the ones showing the highest death count. So this whole issue of social inequities, income disparities, and health disparities, it is on the front line and is a global issue. But I know you have expertise in India, but you have also worked here. What can you suggest? I know this is a hard topic right now, and time will go, people will move on and we'll forget about this again. But what can we do right now while we are in this moment?
That's an excellent point. I mean, you've sort of hit the nail on the head. Over the last several decades, this problem of inequality all over the world has been knocking on our doors, and we have been kind of deaf. In the prosperous countries, inequality has gone up in the last 40 years, by leaps and bounds. So the inequality that America has today, Britain has today, is at a level which existed only before the Great Depression. So if there's a bright line to this, silver lining to this cloud that we have over our heads, the COVID situation, is that maybe it will eventually give us a wake-up call that there has to be something that has to be done about inequality, and we have to find ways in which gains as well as pain on various policies can be shared among the population, right? For example, international trade, American companies going to China and manufacturing cheap there and making consumer goods affordable to those who have incomes. All of that has impacted the working class, right? But jobs have left, wages have crashed, but no remedy has been done. So a lot of things which are good in themselves, like, the prosperity which international trading creates, the environmental regulation, right? You want to move to green energy, but the coal miners and the steel workers, they're thrown out of jobs, right? So overall, it's a good thing. But we also have to have social systems where people's basic needs are taken care of no matter what, right? Whether a pandemic hits, or whether the winds of trade change, or whether we have to change our ways of generating energy from coal to wind, and we haven't set up that system. So very briefly, since we can talk about it for a long time, I think what we need is two things. One is something like a universal basic income, which has been talked about all over the world, right? Terms are important. I would say instead of universal basic income, you could also say citizens' dividend. Just by virtue of being a citizen of America, an American should get a minimum sustenance. So that idea, if it can be implemented, would be that so that everybody's shielded. There's a minimum cushion that you have. Now, of course, the big question is how do governments fund a non-trivial amount of minimum support or income to every citizen? Well, their taxations have to change, and people like Thomas Piketty and others, they have been talking about taxes on, especially on capital income, on corporate profits taxes, on capital gains taxes. They are shamefully low. It's a dark secret, I suppose, or maybe not so dark secret, that the treatment of capital in terms of taxation compared to labor is I would say a scandal, and that has to change. So if capital is taxed more heavily, that can fund something like a universal basic income, and then people have an automatic cushion that come pandemic, come other problems, at least nobody will fall through the cracks and get completely crushed. So that sort of thing is needed.
Another question from the chat room about comparing this package in India and USA. Looks like Prime Minister Modi is playing the same playbook as Donald Trump is playing. And despite all the commentaries in the news media, again, you don't have to be, whatever political opinion you have. I just wanted your opinion about comparing these two models, that lockdown was great, but now people are saying that whatever we did in India was too little too late. And despite this Jan Dhan, despite Aadhaar card, Manrega, all these bureaucratic red tapes, why can't we transfer the money in the hands of the poor migrants directly? What was this all about? Why this could not happen? Dr. Ghosh?
Yes. I mean, just physically transferring currency notes into poor people's hands is difficult because it's a huge country. So you have to look for a channel. And I spoke a little bit about the difficulties of finding the channel, but I think that using this public distribution system, that list, and going by that list to make cash transfers was the best way to go. Unfortunately, that wasn't picked. As far as the overall package is concerned, as people have commented, there is very little grant component or aid component or direct fiscal outlays by the government. Most of it takes the form of loans and credit lines. Now, one should also appreciate the loans. I mean, the loans are useful, right? So, for example, if you take the firms, the small, called MSMEs, right? These little enterprises which support the Indian economy, they have two kinds of problems. One is insolvency. If they have to pay loans and rents, so if they don't earn revenues for 6 months, they will go bankrupt. So that's the insolvency problem. But the other problem is right now, they don't have a cash flow and they have to pay rents and so on and so forth. So the loans take care of the cash flow problem, the immediate cash flow problem. So if a business is viable in the long run, it may go bust just because it doesn't have the cash flow. So loans do have value. But what should have happened is the loans should have been combined with well-targeted actual assistance and fiscal expenditure. And that's where I think more needs to be done.
So I have one more question from the chat room. They want to know, whoever can respond to this question, that now is the time for reopen. It's a challenging time for India and for USA. And there is a new theory written by Harvard economist and physician Julia Marcus about harm reduction theory. And it was written up in Atlantic. Anybody wants to comment what that is? It's like a middle of the road approach for going back to work and restoring economy while saving lives.
I haven't read this piece, so it's hard for me to comment.
Okay, one more
Let's
question.
talk about the question.
Yeah, there's a new app in India. There's a question about the new app, Arogya Setu. And India got great reviews when the app came out. Even the Google and Apple is also following the footsteps of Indian WhatsApp. And I heard there are 100 million people who have downloaded that app. That tells you how to trace, how to track. But what is the problem? I heard there are controversies about it. Is it something applicable to India, or is it just a political sabotaging? Dr. Ghosh?
Yeah, see, I mean, one of the things we run in, if I may take a slightly philosophical take on this, right, just for a moment, that countries where there's a trust between citizen and government, that's a great asset in a time like this, right? I was listening to the interview with the Swedish, I can't remember his name, the person who's in charge of the pandemic response in Sweden. And one of the things he said is that luckily in our society, we have this trust going both ways, citizen to government and the other way around. In India right now, our trust levels are low, whoever's fault it is. And that is where, apps like this, I mean, there can be tremendous social utility. South Korea has used this sort of phone-based contact tracing with great success. So that potential is there. And from what I understand, people are worried about and so we have run into that problem. So let me not take a very definite stance over there, except to say that we have to increase our trust levels in our society between citizen and government.
Okay, I will pass on to Dr. Tibrewal.
Thank you, Dr. Sama. One of the questions in chat room is about herd immunity. And is Dr. Jakas Munir here? Professor Munir? Dr. JP? Okay. Maybe Dr. Mukherjee can answer this about possibility of any correlation between prevalence of antibodies in serum and the herd immunity. Do we have?
I would really like to refrain from responding to that because
Sure.
I think I'm not an expert and I don't like to step outside my box. So.
No, that's fine. I just wondered, the other question is about what would have happened if there was no lockdown. The question is for India, but let's say about no lockdown in USA for another week or two delay, then what could have happened in USA?
Yeah, so in many of our modeling, so the question is like, it was asked, is it time to reopen? So we have been seeing different strategies across the world. Sweden, of course, have taken this path of not interacting and disrupting their public life and continuing more in the realm of letting natural life prevail. Their death rate have been slightly higher than other Scandinavian countries, but the R is really coming down and right about 1 right now. So my notion of this, we quantified lockdown in terms of every period of lockdown. So our calculations show that if there was no lockdown, given that we have a 2-month lockdown, it has prevented about 3 million cases, 2 to 3 million cases. And if you think about 3% fatality rate, then you can think it has saved 60 to 90,000 lives. So I think that's our projection, but at some point of time, you will need to unlock the system and there is no magic key. And so we all have to take our precautions and we have to all personally manage our risks through social distancing, wearing masks, hand washing. I think that schools and educational system, as an educator, I'm very concerned about how our kids and students are going to come back to class. So we are working round the clock, how to safely bring students back, a combination of maybe face-to-face and virtual interactions. And I think workplaces really need to be vigilant about making the work situation safe for people, and that includes people who are going to work in offices, but also household help who are coming to your home to work, which is going to happen in India. Are they being tested? What kind of protection measures you can provide to them as an employer for your safety and their safety? So all of these difficult but unavoidable questions have to be really thought about at a very micro level, at every level of the system, and it's really a bottom-up process.
Thank you, Dr. Mukherjee. The next question is for Dr. Ghosh. There's a lot of talk about migrant worker in India, how they face misery. The question is how you have handled the migrant worker situation differently or in a better way when they were.
I think that there have been two sort of mistakes in handling that situation. One is that the announcement was too sudden, that there was no time for people to hear. After the Prime Minister's speech at 8 o'clock, by midnight, we went into a lockdown. If you look at our neighboring countries like Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, they offered, in those countries, this is South Asian phenomenon, right? People in the agricultural lean season, when there's not much rural jobs, they come to the cities to make some extra income as construction workers and so on. And then they go back when the harvest time. So many countries in this region had those migrant workers, but because they got a window of time to respond to this before the lockdown kicked in, it didn't create this sort of visible sort of human misery that we're coming across. So some warning was necessary. Other thing is, I have to go to my point about cash transfers, right? Migrant workers often, even the basic thing like food, right? Because there are no bases in the villages. Now the government has just changed it. The ration card portable. That no matter where you are, if you produce a ration card, now you can get 5 kgs or 10 kgs that way. But that wasn't the system till very recently. So the migrant workers who came over, they were entitled to the extra 10 kgs of grains, but only if they went back to their villages. Sitting in the city, they were not entitled to it. Now, what if the government gave a decent amount of cash? Cash is much more profitable, right? It's deposited in the State Bank of India branch back in the Munger district, but then he can pull it out from the bank branch in Delhi. And if you follow some of the interviews, on the TV channels where people have been asked right now, they're taking the trains back and they're asked, why did you get the money? They say, our relatives put together money and send it to the villages. The money flow, it's impossible for the family in the village to ship 5 kgs of this extra rice, who will take it to the city? But money flows, it's much more fungible. So more cash transfers would have gone a long way even for the urban migrants who got trapped because of the short notice.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. I'll pass on to Dr. Punam for the next question, please.
Yeah, so Dr. Mukherjee, one of the question is, you did a lot of modeling on how the deaths would have been. So until now, if it wasn't for the lockdown, one point blank question is, how many deaths would we have seen in India till now?
I think I just answered this question, that I think that the projections are that it's hard to really talk about what is the death rate or the mortality rate, but we know the case fatality rate. If I do a projection, if 2 to 3 million cases have been prevented, then we can think anywhere between 60 to 90,000 deaths probably have been prevented.
Great, thank you. So thank you all for it. Yes, Dr. Ghosh, please.
A very quick note, with regards to this cash transfers point, which I am kind of harping on, let me just say that it's not just, the government's package and the policy lacks it. I found it kind of lacking in the discussion. So many people who are coming from the left and asking for more, they're emphasizing, they're asking for give out soaps, give out cooking oil through the PDS system. The PDS system is not set up for in-kind transfers ratcheted up at the country level. So the neglect of finding good creative ways of putting cash in people's pockets, it's not just a critique of the government, it's a criticism I have of the overall policy discourse that has been happening in India. Except for some people, most people have de-emphasized the cash aspect.
So Dr. Mukherjee, we know that, if we don't do the lockdown, your graph is going to be quickly upgoing. And we have done so for an epidemiologist standpoint, the playbook was played very well in India compared to US. We all know that, compared to Italy, compared to Britain. So if that is the case, then usually we see the graph going slowly and steadily and takes a long time to take the peak. Now, what is the peak going to be in India, roughly? Is it going to be June? Is it going to be July? Or is it going to be August?
So this is not being videotaped, right? I'm not on record. So because we see all of this model is being criticized so much. So and you're absolutely right, because we are sort of going very, very slowly. So the R is 1.3 right now. And if you remember the curve that I showed, it is changing very gradually. So the threshold point for R is 1. If R goes below 1, then gradually there will be more recovered cases than infected cases, and we'll get rid of the pandemic. But we are hovering around this 1.2, which will probably go to 1. And so we are going to live with this epidemic for quite some time. And I feel that our models right now are predicting late July, early August, but it is at a very, very slow rate increasing and plateauing out. So if you just think about a hill, right? If the hill is like this, it falls sharply, but if you're growing like this, then it is like that, flattened out. So it's very much pushed behind, so pushed backwards. So the models are predicting late July and August, but if you check with me in 15 days, I'll change my mind. So there is uncertainty with what is happening, how people are reacting, how these interventions are working. There's so many unknowns that projecting the forecast is really hard. The future is really hard. But I think there is a question for Parikshit, which I also wanted to ask as a collaborator and a colleague. And it's the last question, and Dr. Mahadevappa has already asked. Dr. Ghosh, Modi policy overall was okay?
Sorry, I didn't catch it.
Modi policy overall was okay?
In terms of the economic package?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I don't want to give a yes/no answer to a question like that, right? I've talked about various components. I have pointed out things, and I've pointed out some deficiencies. And you know, I mean, the clock is running, so things can still evolve and change, and more support may be forthcoming. So we can only make a case for that.
Thank you.
Is Dr. JP here? Dr. Mulyal? Are you there? There is a question for you about herd immunity and then reinfection. If somebody has an infection, you know, can they get this infection again? And is the question. So I guess it's about the effectiveness of the antibodies that we form. Yeah. Are you there? Yeah, I think he's left. Yeah.
Dr. Mukherjee can answer about the reinfection rate. Dr. Mukherjee, would you be?
Yeah, so the thing is that we have not seen any evidence yet. So we don't know either way. We do not know whether, first of all, there was a question about antibody testing and serology tests, whether that gives immunity. We do not know yet. And we do not know, in all our models, we have not allowed for this possibility that someone who has recovered can get back into the compartment of susceptible. So we have really, so that changes all of the equations and projections if somebody can return to that susceptible compartment and get infected again. So far I have not seen any evidence, but this is something that I'm not very comfortable talking about.
Yeah, there is a study out there in South Korea where, you know, the lay press reported about 300 cases being retested and then they were positive. But the thought process is after the patient gets, you know, recovered from the infection, you still harbor some particles of the virus. So that doesn't essentially mean that, you know, they could get infection again. But you know, and the other thing is virologists are coming out with the opinion that this makes an excellent candidate for a vaccine. So that's a very good news for all of us. Because the mutations are not too much of a shift. So that is one thing. So I think we are running out of time here. So if we don't have any outstanding questions, Vijaya, can you please put up the disclaimer slide before we'll hand over to Dr. Seema Arora, the Chair of Board of Trustees, API. So while she's putting up the screen, the services of API COVID-19 teleconferences is for information purpose only, should not be considered as medical or financial or economical advice. API has no liability as to how this is interpreted, no liability for results, losses, damages that may be caused directly or indirectly or incidentally. Please refer to CDC website and your state government health authority for information and updates. So with that, I invite Dr. Seema Arora, Chair of Board of Trustees, API.
Thank you, Sujit. So I would like to thank all the speakers for this excellent and unique webinar. Dr. Mukherjee, Dr. Jayaprakash, and Dr. Ghosh. The talks were excellent, and thanks for shedding light on the epidemiology of this disease. Important things like herd immunity, effects of lockdowns, public health issues, and impact on economies. Very enlightening and certainly challenging issues. Thanks to all the moderators, Dr. Sujit Poonam, Dr. Brahma Sharma, and Dr. Anil Tebrawal. So I would like to invite everyone to attend our webinars on every Wednesday and Saturday. And starting next Wednesday, we are also providing CMEs on these webinars. And I would also like to inform everybody that we will be having our first virtual API convention from June 26th to 28th. And we'll be offering CMEs on all the webinars during that convention. And they're going to be excellent talks. So with that, I would like to say good night to everyone in the US and good day to everyone in India. Thanks to all the audience for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.